Thank you both so much for that moment. Welcome to Eastwind. My name is Katie, and I'm excited to be with you this morning and in this fourth message of the Songs of Summer series. And I hate to kind of start with a downer, but I do have two bad pieces of information for you, okay? The first is this. Actually, before the bad news, let's do good news. I'll give a single dollar bill to anyone who does the blimpy and run and makes Carlos chase them, okay? I'm just putting that on the table. I would love to see it personally. It's worth an entire dollar to me. Anyone want to match it? Anyone want to match the dollar? Okay, a bunch of stingy. I got one match over here. Okay, $2 to whoever grabs and runs, okay? Yeah, I got $3. Okay, there's an auctioneer now. Okay, $3 to whoever grabs and runs and Carlos chases them, okay? He's not in the room. He didn't hear it. It's going to be all fun and games. The bad news, though, is this song is New Wine, and my dad this morning texted me and said, are there going to be free samples? And I said, I hate to break it to you, there's no wine involved in this morning's service. Okay, so I'm just going to get that out the way before you're like, ooh, when does she roll the card out? Okay, that's not happening. The third piece of bad news is the second piece of bad news is if you came in here and maybe you haven't been to church in a while, or it's your first time in church, and you go, man, you know, I got to be in church. It's going to be uplifting. It's going to really warm my spirit. As kumbaya, this is going to be a great experience. I'm starting you off on the wrong foot for that, okay? I'm basically going to ask you to start a fight with the people next to you. So I'm going to recommend, if you've been here on Eastwind Sunday services before, you know that we ask you to turn and talk to the people next to you. We ask some questions related to the subject that we're discussing. I'm going to recommend this morning, this first question, you don't speak to the person you came with because you want to actually go home with them, okay? Or you find some stranger, like not a friend, okay? Because this is a question that probably everyone's going to be offended by, okay? So if you're going to make enemies, at least make enemies with the stranger, okay? And then next time you see them in church, you can fight them or something, okay? So here's this question. What genre of music do you absolutely never turn on? Okay, turn to somebody near you. What genre of music offends somebody? Okay, it's Sunday morning. Happy Sunday. What genre of music will you never, ever turn on? Go ahead and chat with somebody next to you. If you're online, go ahead and drop it in the comments. What genre of music will you not listen to? All right, finish hurting somebody's feelings next to you. How many of you guys are like, somebody said to me my favorite genre of music ever? You're like, I don't want to raise your hands. They're right there. Okay. Wow, you guys are so well behaved. I'm so proud of you. Personally, I can't stand, I will listen to literally anything. I love music. I love almost every single genre of music. I draw the line in one place and one place only, and that's death metal screamo, okay? I'm so sorry if that's you. Wow, I think maybe the first service is death metal because I got some dirty looks, but this service you guys are like, yeah, yes, I appreciate you. You're my favorite. I just can't do it. I tried to go to a concert with a friend one time because I loved them, and then I was like, I actually don't love you. I can't do this. I gotta go. So I can't do that. But we're doing this series, Songs of Summer, and at first you might go, well, why a series about music? And one of the things we say often here at Eastwind is that music is really powerful, and is never more powerful than when it's lyrics that are true. When it's truth set to a tune, when it's truth set to music, it's so, so powerful. And music is so powerful that even if I ask, the last few weeks, Dee and Carlos have been doing all the feel-good stuff. You know, I heard there was a sing-along last week, and Dee has everybody going, amazing, and then we're over here just fighting, okay? Music is so powerful, it can go both ways. It can bring out intense feelings in us for the better or for the worse. Music has this intrinsic power to the human experience, and it's a part of our worship in our community. It's a part of the way that we engage with God. It's a part of the way that we engage with others. Music is just so powerful, and I would even venture it's this powerful that music frames our memories, and our memories frame our identity. This might seem like a big statement, but I actually think it's really true. I think it's big enough, music is big enough for this to be really true. Music frames our memories, and our memories frame our identity. If you were here a couple weeks ago, you know Carlos went through some important moments in his life, and he was saying, this is the song that I remember with that. Songs take us back. I know we were just at junior high camp last week, and in the bus ride there and back, I was trying to, pass on some legendary music to the next generation, and they were like, we don't care to know your stories, Katie, about how great this song was back in the day, okay? But it's memories. When songs came on, I was like, I can tell you exactly where I was when I first heard that song. I can tell you why that song matters to me. I can tell you why it still brings tears to my eyes if I can hear it. I can tell you why I get up and dance when I hear that song. Music is so powerful, and it shapes our memories, and our memories ultimately shape our identity. I learned this in a profound way when I was 17, a senior in high school, and my granddad was kind of coming to the end of his life, and he had suffered from dementia, Alzheimer's, a memory loss, a severe memory loss for a couple of years prior. And in one of the last visits that we had with him, he was in a home. He needed a lot of care at the time. And we were trying to, if you've ever had a loved one with memory loss, you know how painful this moment can be. You're trying to get through to someone that doesn't recognize you anymore. They don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. Their identity is being lost. And so we're just trying anything and everything we can think of to try and get through to him, to try and find granddad in there somewhere, right? And so we're throwing out memories, we're throwing out stories, we're cracking jokes, all that kind of thing, and nothing's really getting through to him. And finally, two things get through. One thing is my dad pulled up a memory. He said, do you remember that Little League game I pitched and it was the finals and we lost? And my granddad, for the first time, you see a little light and he goes, it's just like that, right? And we go, baseball, got him. Okay, I come by it honestly. And then the second thing is, that was it. It was just a flicker, and he shook his head. He remembered the loss. And for another half an hour, we're trying to get through. And by chance, my brother goes and starts playing a piano in the corner of the home. And when I say this whole room, this was a memory care facility. This whole room, there had to have been a half dozen folks in this room who all of a sudden lit up, and for the first time they looked up from whatever they were doing or wherever they were sitting, and my granddad among them, and they start singing along to just these old hymns. And it comes back to them. He's been nowhere to be found for the last hour. We're trying anything to get through to him, and music starts playing, and he comes back, and he starts singing these songs of praise. He can barely speak coherent words, but he starts singing along and humming along with these words. And that did two things for me as a 17-year-old. The first was it made me wonder what songs I'm going to be singing, right? As a 17-year-old, I was like, "Whoa, my playlist, maybe not what I want my grandkids to be hearing." Okay, so it was a real check for me. But the second thing that it did was it drilled home to me this profound power that music has. I went, nothing else is getting through to granddad, but a piano starts playing, he was back. Music is so powerful. It can reach us in some of the most distant places that we find ourselves. And that is why we're doing this series, this Songs of Summer series, because we believe that it matters, the music that we sing, it matters, the songs that we listen to, it matters, the truth that we declare. When we come in here and we sing on Sunday mornings, we're not just picking random songs out. We're selecting songs that remind us of our identity, that tie our memories and our identity together, because music is that important and that powerful. This song, New Wine, that we're talking about this morning, it's a song that personally I have loved for years. It's so beautiful, and it's got such profound truth to it. But at its core, it's a song about Jesus doing a new thing. And I know for most humans, we don't naturally gravitate to new things. We are pretty comfortable with the familiar. If you don't believe me, I'm going to have you turn to one another one more time and just answer this question. What is one old thing that you refuse to update? If you go, not me, I'm a trendsetter, I'm a trend keeper, I am up with the times all the time. If you know somebody around you, you have a friend sitting with you or something, they will set you straight in a heartbeat. They'll be like, you've had the same lunch every day for a month, okay? So what is one old thing that you refuse to update? Go ahead and turn to one another now. What is one thing you refuse to update? Take just a second. Finish up. What's that new thing you refuse to update? Personally, I like to think of myself as someone who likes new things. I'm pretty sure that I'm someone who likes new experiences. I like to try new foods. I generally don't say no to new things. But I am like most of us. If it was up to me, I would still have this phone from about a decade ago, an iPhone 4. It's not a new one, you guys. The high schoolers in the front, it's not a new one, okay? This is a really old one. I would still have this with no updates. I'm the person that waits until the last second until they're like, your phone will auto explode if you don't update tonight. Do it. This is your last warning, right? I'm like, if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That's generally, I'm like, if it works, I'm okay with it. These are my actual car keys. This is my car. I have a key. Ooh, vintage for some of you, right? I have an actual key. I went to rent a car a couple of years ago, and I got in the car, and I promise you, I was in an Enterprise parking lot almost on the verge of tears because I couldn't figure out how to start for like 20 minutes. I was like, I need a real key. There's a button somewhere. Nobody explained this to me. I have no idea how it works. I was trying to like pop a key out from the thing for 20 minutes. I was like, it's gotta trigger somewhere, right? The new things can generally throw us off. I don't know how many of you have recently tried to help a kid with their homework, okay? Yeah, exactly. The first I was like, oh, I had teachers texting me afterwards, don't bash Common Core. New things can throw us off. They can really unsettle us. And I would go so far as to say generally, for good reason, new things scare humans. And you might substitute a different word in there. You might say it overwhelms or it intimidates. You might say, not me, Katie, but I bet that if I told you you're going to walk into work tomorrow morning and you have a new boss, you'd be like, okay, well, I'm not scared, but I don't love it, right? Or if I said you're going to go home and you have a brand new roommate, some of you would be like, whew, about time. But some of you would say, I don't know who I'm getting. That's an unknown, that's new. I don't know about that. Some of you, if I said you're going to go home and you have homework to do, or you have work to catch up on, or you have a family vacation to plan, and guess what? I have a new computer with a new operating system for you. You guys would go, oh, I'm still not scared, Katie, but I get it, okay? We don't love new things. And this is the story that Jesus tells. We're going to be looking at Jesus' words in the Gospel of Luke today, an eyewitness account of what Jesus did during his time on earth. And this took place in a real location about 2,000 years ago, a town called Capernaum. This is, if you go to it today, this is how it looks. This is the location, most likely, that Jesus told this story on. This is the tabernacle now, the temple where they would have worshiped. These are kind of the ruins that are left of it. Capernaum was Jesus' adult hometown. Many of us know that feeling. You grow up, you move, you have a few different hometowns. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He grew up in Nazareth, and then as an adult, this was kind of his home. This was his center of ministry. This is where he lived and taught, and most often came back and said, I'm home for the weekends, that kind of thing. This was Capernaum. And Jesus comes here, and this is early in his ministry. The story that we're about to read is early in his ministry. It's early in his adult work, and he is selecting his disciples. This is important to frame up because in that day, Jesus would have been going out as a rabbi, and a rabbi was someone who was a prestigious Jewish leader and teacher. It was someone who knew the law of God inside and out, and what they would do is collect some disciples to follow them around and learn everything that they knew. And they would just follow them until they knew everything, until the student became the master, right? And then they would go out and select disciples, and then they would go out and select disciples, and so on and so forth. So when the time came for a rabbi to select disciples, particularly if it was a rabbi that was getting a lot of buzz, that was getting famous quickly like Jesus was, because by this time Jesus is going around healing people, doing miraculous signs, so there's a lot of buzz on his name. And it's a big question, who's he going to pick? But it was usually pretty predictable who he would pick, because it was obvious if you were qualified or unqualified to be a rabbi's disciple. It was obvious if you had the credentials or not. And generally, you had the credentials if you were affluent in some way. You were affluent in your learning, or you were affluent in your connections, or you were affluent in your education, or you were affluent in wealth. It was obvious to everybody watching, well, that person's going to get picked, that person's not going to get picked. That person's going to get the job, that person's not going to get the job. And Jesus starts picking all the wrong people. He starts going around and selecting people that make no sense for a rabbi to pick, and it's causing a lot of confusion. This is where our story picks up. So after this, Jesus has been walking around, healing people, doing miraculous signs, and picking all the wrong people, okay? Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." A quick pause right as we get started. Number one, Levi and Matthew, same name, or same guy, different name, okay? So the Gospel of Matthew, we're talking about that same guy. He was originally a tax collector sitting at the tax office. This is the height of betrayal to your people. If you're a tax collector, we don't know if this was the only job available to this man. He could have been just trying to put food on the table for his family. He could have been intentionally, viciously betraying his people politically. We don't know the backstory there. But we do know that tax collectors were absolutely hated. Their job was basically to be yelled at and cursed out and called all types of names for betraying their people. They collected taxes on behalf of an oppressive and violent government from people that were being oppressed and hurt by the government, okay? And usually what they would do is they would up the prices a little bit so they could line their own pockets. So these were just dirty, no good scoundrels is how the culture viewed them. And it was a job where you basically just accepted you're going to be yelled at all the time. A really mild modern day equivalent, like I said, baseball is in my blood. I'm a big Angels baseball fan. This guy, our manager, Phil Nevin, gets thrown out like once a month from a game because he goes out there and yells at an ump's face. And he's like, that's their job. Their job is to get yelled at. And this is like how it looks at least once a month. You turn on the game and this guy is just like going crazy, getting thrown out of some game because he's yelling at the umps. This is Matthew's life. He's just yelled at all the time. This is his job. This is his life. He's throwing someone out of games every single day of his life. And for the first time, someone actually looks at him and offers him a different alternative. It makes a ton of sense why Matthew would follow Jesus. It doesn't make a ton of sense why Jesus would pick Matthew. But it makes a ton of sense that if your job is this, and someone comes one day and goes, I think you're actually better than that. Do you want to follow me? Do you want to train for a different profession? Of course you're going to say, yeah, thank goodness. Like someone sees me for more than just a trader. That's incredible. But it doesn't make a lot of sense why Jesus would pick Matthew. The story carries on that obviously he says, leaving everything behind, he got up and began to follow him, Jesus. He got up and began to follow Jesus. Very quickly he said, yes, that's the direction I want to go. And it meant a loss of riches and wealth, and he didn't know what was next, but he said, I want a different path. And he started to follow Jesus. And what he does, then Levi hosted a grand banquet for him, Jesus, at his house. Levi immediately goes to celebrate it. He goes, this is amazing. I've been given a new future. I've been given a different path. Come over to my house for a party. Let's celebrate it. Now there was a large crowd of tax collectors and others who were guests with them. So Levi just invites all of his buddies who are just more scum of the earth type that the Jews would have thought, right? And so now this party is a mess. I don't know if you've ever been to a party where someone didn't curate the guest list, right? Have you ever been to those parties? You're like, oh, I didn't know you were going to be here, right? This is what's happening at this party. And the Pharisees, who are the leaders, the religious leaders of the day, they're at this party too somehow. And it says the Pharisees and their scribes were complaining to his disciples. They're complaining about Jesus. They don't have the nerve to tell Jesus to his face what they think about what he's doing. But they're complaining to his disciples. This is an important note to kind of notice. They're all at the party, but everyone's kind of breaking off. I don't know if you've ever been at a party where you know there's some gossip and drama happening, and someone catches your eye across the room and is like, do you need to refill your drink? You're like, yes, I do. Here we go. And you get the whole scoop on what's going on. This is what the crowd there hasn't quite decided what they feel about what Jesus is doing. And people are all over the map on it, from opposing it to being in favor of it. And everyone there shouldn't get along with each other. Politically and ideologically, background, economically, they shouldn't be getting along with each other, but they're all at this party trying to figure out what Jesus is doing. So they're complaining. The Pharisees, the leaders of the law, are complaining, and it's probably worth noting they probably hoped that Jesus, this powerful new up-and-coming rabbi, would choose them, but instead he's passing over them as his disciples and choosing tax collectors and fishermen, and it's kind of a slap in the face to them. They're going, I'm qualified. Why am I being passed over? So they complain. Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? They're going to his disciples. Why are you in this mixed company? And Jesus overhears it, as he often does, and he replies to them, the healthy don't need a doctor, but the sick do. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And this doesn't quite, it's a good answer, but it doesn't quite do it for the Pharisees. So they swing back again. They said, then now they're talking to Jesus. Then they said to him, well, John's disciples fast often, and they say prayers. And those of the Pharisees do the same, but yours eat and drink. They're upset. They're confused and they're upset. And they're saying, well, this prestigious teacher, this is what their disciples do. And these prestigious teachers, this is what their disciples do. Why are yours eating and drinking? This doesn't make any sense. And Jesus, they're not yet enemies of Jesus, but they're not fans at this point either. They're trying to figure out what they think about this guy. And Jesus replies, he says, well, you can't make wedding guests fast while the groom is with them, can you? He goes, it would be ridiculous to go to a wedding and go, oop, I'm fasting, no cake for me. Actually, I'm just going to watch you eat. It's more fun that way. He's like, that's ridiculous. You wouldn't do that. And he goes on. He says, but the time will come when the groom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days. He's already predicting his death and predicting that there's going to be a loss of that connection with him. He's going to be gone for a time. He's going to come back. And then he told them a parable. Jesus always does this. He'll explain something a little bit, and then he'll say, let me tell you a story. And then he told them a parable. No one tears a patch from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, not only will he tear the new, but the piece from the new garment will not match the old. So he basically says, okay, you have a torn up garment that needs to be mended, and you have a brand new garment. It would be ridiculous, right, to tear a piece from the new garment, ruin the new garment, and then take that piece and patch it onto the old garment. Those of you in this room who know anything about sewing and patching and all that kind of thing, you know that if you do that and one of the pieces of cloth is shrunk and the other is unshrunk, right, then the first time you wash it, that thing is just going to be torn and the tear is going to be even worse. And so Jesus says, that's ridiculous, right? You wouldn't do that. That doesn't make any sense. But then he doubles down and he tells another parable. He says, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, it will spill, and the skins will be ruined. This is one of those things that we have to get a little bit of cultural context. We have to remember this is a story from 2,000 years ago. They didn't have excellent wineries and bottling processes, and everyone was sitting around with a 40-year-old Cabernet being like, ooh, notes of oak, right? Like this wasn't a thing that they did back then. What they would do is at the harvest every single year, they would take grapes and they would make wine out of it. They would make juice and they would put it in these wine skins, these animal skins. And what would happen is as the wine fermented and the yeast and the sugar and everything's eating each other and the gases are created, what would happen is these animal skins would expand with the wine. And if the skins were brittle, if they were left over from the last year, then as there was this fermentation process, the skins would burst. This is what the skins generally looked like. It's very obvious it was an animal skin. And what would happen is you would put the wine in this and you would stitch it up. They had an option from time to time to serve wine or store wine for a short period of time in these jars, but you can't obviously leave it out like that exposed to the air for too long. So most of the skins looked like this. And you would put the wine in it and you would let the wine ferment and go from juice into wine, and it would expand with the animal skin. And if the skin was a new skin, then everything was just fine, and you would serve the wine throughout the season. But if it was an old skin, if you were trying to, cheapskate for a year or something, you didn't want to go to the trouble of making a new skin, and you put it in an old skin, then as it expanded, the skin would just burst. This gets hard and brittle with time. And so it would just burst because of the fermentation inside of it. And then not only is the skin ruined, but also the wine is a loss. And so Jesus used an example from their everyday life, and he just says simply, new wine should be put into fresh wineskins. He says, this should make sense to you. This is your everyday life. It's common sense. You wouldn't put a new wine into an old wineskin. It would just be a waste. So put the new wine in fresh wineskins. And then he throws this little curveball in at the very end. And he says, no one, after drinking old wine, wants new, because he says, the old is better. And Jesus displays an uncanny amount of insight into the human experience with this line. He says, if you're satisfied with the old, it's not even going to cross your mind to want the new. If the old is working for you, you won't want the new. I'm going to explain a little bit more of what Jesus meant by these words, by these somewhat perplexing stories. But before we do that, a quick aside, Kraft macaroni and cheese, everybody. It's just a lot of left turns. You're just going to have to hang with it. Here's the thing. When I was a kid and my parents would go out for an evening and they had, something to do, some event to attend or something, they would leave me and my younger brothers at home at an appropriate age, whatever that is in your head, that's the age it was. They would leave us at home, and they would leave us with a few boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese and be like, this is your dinner for the night. You don't even have to eat vegetables. And I was like, oh, yeah. And as like a 9-year-old, I thought this was the height of cuisine, right? I thought this was like the greatest thing that mankind had ever known was Kraft macaroni and cheese. And I made it myself, and I would put like a little cracked salt on top and be like, ooh, like I'm super fancy. And this was like the most delicious thing in the world. I have the fondest of memories of Kraft macaroni and cheese. Fast forward to my adult life, and I start dating this guy from the South. If you know anything about the South, they take their food very seriously, okay? One time, the idea that Jeff makes mac and cheese floated out, and I was like, oh, I bet I love mac and cheese. This is what's in my head, okay? And I was like, I love mac and cheese. I would love if you made it sometime. He makes it the first time, and I see what's on my plate, and I think to myself, I'm going to have to lie to this man for the rest of my life and say I've never heard of Kraft macaroni and cheese because this is so different. And I ate it, and in my head, I went, I have never had real mac and cheese. I realized suddenly, as an adult, this was fake, okay? I realized suddenly as an adult, this was not mac and cheese. And I ate it, and I was like, oh my goodness, number one, this is delicious. You can make this anytime you want. But number two, my bad. I did not realize Kraft macaroni and cheese off the table. This is not an option, okay? Imagine if the next time Jeff makes this, I see him making mac and cheese, and I'm like, ooh, delicious. Bet I'm going to whip up a little something too. And I go to the store, because we don't keep these in the house, okay? I know my limits. I go to the store, and I pick up a few boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese, and I whip it up. And when Jeff puts like the real Southern mac and cheese on the plate, I just put some Kraft right next to it. Ooh, dinner time, everybody, dish up, right? Some of you guys' eyes just got so wide, you're like, your marriage won't make it, Katie. Don't do it. It's not worth the risk, right? This is what Jesus is saying. If all you know is the old, you're not even going to think to ask for the new. All I knew was Kraft macaroni and cheese. It never crossed my mind to be like, is there something better out there? I didn't lie awake at night being like, who could truly top Kraft macaroni and cheese? I was just happy with it. I was like, this is just fine for me. It's working for me. It's the same with spirituality. I didn't know until I tasted something better that there was anything better out there. And it's the same with spirituality. It's hard to be interested in Jesus when our plan is working. If you're just drinking the old wine, you're not going to sit around going, I need new wine, because you're like, this is just fine. This is working just fine for me. This is a generally true principle of spirituality that if our life plan is working, we're not going to be all that interested in what Jesus is saying. It's often only when we get pushed to the edge of ourselves, where we find ourselves in a painful or desperate situation, that we open ourselves up to something new. It's hard to be interested in Jesus if our plan is working. Some of us in this room today, we're like, I'm fine. Like, I really am okay. And so we're not all that interested in what Jesus has to say about our lives. This is what Jesus is saying when he says, no one after drinking old wine, no one after eating Kraft macaroni and cheese wants real macaroni and cheese, because she says it's better. It's fine. I'm not that interested in upgrading. It's hard for us to accept that. But what Jesus is saying with these parables is something that's been confused often. A lot of people, when they try to explain the content of this parable, a common misconception is for people to say, well, what Jesus might be talking about here is the Old Testament and the old law, and how he's throwing that away, and it's the old wineskins, and you got to get rid of those so that you have the new wineskins, and Jesus is going to bring a new law. But that doesn't make a ton of sense if we look within the context of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these biographies of Jesus, because Jesus over and over again says, I haven't come to abolish the law. I didn't come to throw away the Old Testament. I came to fulfill it. I came to make it as it was supposed to be. I came to be the fullest picture of the law. I didn't come to throw it away. So that can't be what Jesus was talking about, because it would go opposite everything that he said in other places. Sometimes when we come across passages in Scripture that are confusing or perplexing, or we don't know where to start in understanding them, an easy question to ask is, who were they talking to? Who were they talking to? If it's words in quotations and that kind of thing, you can ask, who are they talking to? If it's a written letter to somebody, you can ask, who is this written to? And that context helps us frame up a little bit of what is actually happening. In this case, Jesus was talking and telling this story about wine and wineskins, and we're just going to zero in on that one. He was talking about it to the Pharisees, an elite group of religious leaders who had their own culture and stories and traditions and all of this kind of thing. And one of the things that they had was a story that was commonly known and commonly told and retold. It was a super short, simple parable. I'm actually going to read to you here. That was often told amongst the Pharisees. Jesus does, with this story of the wine and the wineskins, what he so often does. He takes a well-known parable that the community was familiar with, and he just remixes it. So it has a surprising ending. He flips a few pieces around, so people at the beginning would go, oh, I know this story. And by the end, they would go, I don't remember it ending that way before. This is what Jesus is doing, and this is the parable that he would have known well and that he remixes in this. It goes like this. He who studies as a child, what can he be compared to? He can be compared to ink written upon a fresh new sheet of paper. But he who studies as an adult, what can he be compared to? He can be compared to ink written on a smudged, previously used and erased sheet of paper. It goes on. The second part says this. He who learns from the young, what can he be compared to? He can be compared to those who eat unripe grapes and drink sour wine. But he who learns from the old, what can he be compared to? He can be compared to one who eats ripe grapes and drinks old wine. Do not pay attention, then, to the container, but pay attention to what is in it. There's a new container full of old wine, but there's an old container that does not even contain new wine. And it's this parable that would have been told consistently in this community to basically say, hey, once you've learned something, it's really hard to accept that you might not know all the answers. It's really, our phrase for it now is you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? We say that all the time. And maybe you have a program at work or something that you always get your coworkers help with because you're like, I just can't learn it. It's just not my thing, right? We still do this today that we go, once you've learned something, it takes a tremendous amount of effort to either A, unlearn it and relearn something else, or B, be humble enough to think you don't have all the answers on it. And Jesus is saying, this is what I'm talking about here, is all of these riffraff that are following me around, all the people that you guys hate, they know that they don't know about God. They know that they don't have the answers. They're a blank sheet of paper for me to write on. I can teach them this new way of faith. I can show them what it means to follow me, Jesus. They're a blank sheet of paper. You religious elite, you think you know all the answers. You're like a smudged piece of paper that's been written on and erased and written on and erased, and it's hard to write on you because you think you already have it figured out. When he tells the parable of the wineskins, he's not telling a story about what laws to keep or throw out. He's telling a story about individuals. And he's saying, you as an individual, are you a new or an old wineskin? Because if I put new wine into you, if you're an old wineskin, not only will you ruin my wine, but your life will explode. You can't handle the new wine. I can only give you new wine if you're a new wineskin, one that can accept that you don't know everything about God, one that can embrace mystery. This is fundamentally what Jesus is saying, is you can't just add new wine to your life. The shape of it has to change. I can't just add Kraft macaroni and cheese to any plate anymore. I had to change what I actually believe about it, right? You can't just add new wine to your life. The actual shape of it has to change. And once again, I can't overemphasize how difficult this is to do if everything in your life is going smoothly. If you're generally successful in life, it is so difficult to have the humility and the presence of mind to say, you know what, I could use a lot less of myself and more of God. Generally, as humans, we don't have that much maturity. Generally, as humans, we come to that realization when things don't work for us anymore. There's a series on the internet that illustrates this perfectly, because the internet, that I would love to share with you. There's this series the atheism leaving my body, right? The atheism leaving my body when the landing airplane starts violently shaking, right? And if you're in this room and you're like, I'm an atheist, I really hope you find this as funny as I do. I love this like sub-thread on the internet. The atheism leaving my body when, and then you insert some terrifying scenario. Winnie the Pooh got mixed up in it, okay, when his spirit left his body. The atheism leaving my body when my car hydroplanes, right? We all kind of know, we've had maybe at least one or two experiences where we go, I'm not even sure that I believe in something else, but I hope there's a higher power because I need them to save my life right now, right? That is a feeling that we all know, and sometimes it's in a single moment like a car hydroplaning. Sometimes it's facing some painful and long circumstances. If you thought I couldn't go more random than Winnie the Pooh, try Taylor Swift. When she was writing a song about her mom's journey with cancer and what that was doing to her, she wrote this line that said, desperate people find faith, so now I pray to Jesus too. And it's this line that perfectly articulates so many of our journeys, that desperate people are the ones who find faith, so now I pray to Jesus too. And people who said they never would, when you're pushed to the brink of yourself, you sometimes go, I hope there's something out there because I'm willing to try it now. And sometimes that happens over and over again in a spiritual life. Maybe you've been following God for a long time, but you get pushed past yourself again and again. And again, we circle back to God and say, I need you in this moment. I didn't know I needed you, but now I'm so desperate, I'm so broken, I'm so hurt that I need you in this moment. And that's what Jesus is saying in this story. He's saying, I'm not just a new patch, I'm not just a new wine. I'm not an elective that you add to your life. I'm a fulfillment of all the law and prophets. I'm something totally new. I'm something that's going to revolutionize your life if you let me. I want to close with an illustration of someone who I think, if they had been given the chance, would have sung new wine with their whole heart. The Pharisees were this group of religious leaders who, for the most part, missed what Jesus was doing. They were so sure, they were so rigid in their ideas, they were so sure that they knew God inside and out, that they could predict his every move, that they, by and large, missed what God was doing. But there was one man named Nicodemus, and I would say it this way, Nicodemus engaged the mystery. He embraced the mystery. He looked at Jesus and he went, that's something that doesn't fit in my framework. I don't know what to do about it. This is a mystery. But it doesn't fit my framework. I have to know more. Instead of just throwing it away, most of the Pharisees just threw it away. They said, that doesn't fit my framework, so it's out of here. But Nicodemus embraced the mystery. His story is found in 3 different places in the Gospel of Luke, and the first time we meet him is in John 3. It goes like this. There was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. All you need to know here is big deal, okay? He came to Jesus at night and said, Rabbi, we know that you're a teacher who's come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. He looked at Jesus, and he looked at this life that didn't fit within his framework of what he believed faith to be, of what he believed a good Jewish person would do, of the people that a Jewish person should and should not hang out with, of the friends and the friends made of enemies. And he looked and he said, I got to talk to this man. I know he's from God. There's no other way he could do what he's doing. He's got to be from God, but I don't get it. And Jesus, this whole conversation is recorded in John 3. If you can go home this week and read it, I would encourage you to. It's a profound, deep theological conversation about what it means to follow Jesus, especially if you come from a religious context of any way. But it's the passage where we have the famous Bible verse, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him shouldn't perish, but should have eternal life. That's seated in the context of this conversation. But Jesus just cuts to the chase with Nicodemus. And he says this right out the gate. Very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they're born again. And he's basically saying, Nicodemus, you're a piece of paper that's been written on many times. You're very educated. You're learned. You know many things. It was said that Nicodemus himself even did miracles and healed people. Nicodemus was as big a deal as they come in religious contexts. And when Jesus hit the scene, Nicodemus said, I don't know how to wrap up what Jesus is doing, this new thing, with my old experience. And Jesus just says, you just got to be born again. You're an old wineskin. You have ideas about how I work that if I put new wine in you, it's not going to make any sense to you. It will explode your life. It will blow things up and not in a good way. And so the option then is to be born again. Allow me to make you entirely new. This is a promise that we get even in the Old Testament about what Jesus will do. It says, see, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and I'm making streams in the wasteland. God says, I can do the impossible. If you're an old wineskin, if you're a written on piece of paper, I mean, for goodness sake, if you're riffraff collecting money from your countrymen on the side of the road, no matter where you are on the journey, I can make you new. You can be born again. You have this option. You just got to ask me for it. New Wine is this beautiful, beautiful song that just reminds us of a simple, simple truth. New Wine is a song that reminds us that when God does new things, he does new things. He doesn't half-heartedly rewrite things. He does new things. Nicodemus pops up several chapters later. He's in a gathering of the religious elite, and by this time they're mad, and they're trying to find a way to end Jesus' life in some capacity. And Nicodemus is the one who steps up and advocates for Jesus and goes, wait a second, doesn't the law say that a witness needs to be heard? Shouldn't we hear him out first? Nicodemus doubles down. He begins to explore what it means to follow Jesus, and that pushes him into a closer relationship with the scriptures and a closer relationship with what God truly wants. And then Nicodemus appears one more time at the end when Jesus has died and before he's resurrected. And Nicodemus is one of the main financiers of the oils and the myrrh to anoint his body, the spices to anoint his body and give him a proper burial. He does above and beyond a proper burial. He does a burial fit for royalty in that day. And Nicodemus gets it because he goes, I got to be born again. I can't just add Jesus as an elective. He's not a new patch. He's not just new wine. He is a whole new thing. He's a new wineskin. He's a new piece of paper for me to write on, and the only way I get that is if I give Jesus everything. It's a hard word for us because it is really hard to lay down our pride enough to give God our whole life. It's work that I have to remind myself of consistently. It's work that makes us need each other in community. It's work that sends us back to the scriptures over and over to figure out what God is doing. It's work that keeps us close to Jesus. It's hard to do. But I had someone come up to me in tears after the first service and be like, that's my story. I've been given a new wineskin so many times. God keeps doing new things in my life. And just with tears in their eyes, they said, I wouldn't trade it for anything. That's my story, and I'm so grateful. As we close this morning, I'm going to invite you to reflect just for yourself on these two questions. The first is just, who do you most relate to in this story? You may say, I'm one of those early Pharisees. I'm confused. Jesus is doing something in my life. I don't quite get it. I have some questions. You might go, I'm Matthew. I have been far away from God, and I'm wondering what it might look like to come home. You might go, I'm one of the disciples that doesn't really know how to give a defense of God just yet, but I'm trying to figure this out. But who in this story do you most relate to? And then the second question, we're on break for life groups for the summer, and so this isn't built into your small group time later this week. No one's going to sit down and say, hey, who do you relate to most in this story? Who are you connected most in this story? No one's going to hold your feet to the fire on that. You kind of have to initiate this conversation yourself, okay? So I would encourage you, things become more real when we say them out loud. It just is the truth of the matter. So I would encourage you to think about who is someone I could reach out to this week. Maybe someone from your life group, maybe a close, trusted friend, maybe a pastor on staff. You reach out to one of us and just say, hey, this is where I'm at right now. Can you pray for me? I'm trying to figure out this new wine and new wineskin thing. So take just a moment, reflect on these questions for yourself, and then the band's going to come up and close us out.